Welcome to Jaguar Bootcamp, timing your first race. This is part 3, preparing. The information in this presentation is the property of Innovative Timing Systems, LLC. All of this information is confidential and may not be disclosed to anyone outside of Innovative Timing Systems or your own company without written authorization from the President of Innovative Timing Systems. This presentation is only provided to customers who are under a current support agreement that is not expired. In this module, we're going to demonstrate how to set up Jaguar to time your first race. For this training module, we'll assume that we have a race coming up this Saturday, and it's a 5 and 10K being held in St. Louis, Missouri. This is just an example race, so the settings we'll be using are just for this demonstration only. We're going to assume that you've already got your Jaguar software loaded and you've already completed the other training modules that are available that lead up to this particular one. So, you're ready to go. Well, let's get started. The first thing we want to do for our race this Saturday is we want to make sure that our divisions are set up. How do we do that? Well, we'll simply go over to the Race Info menu, and under that you'll see the option for division settings. Now in this particular case, our fake race this weekend is going to be a 5K and a 10K, so we've already typed that information in to Jaguar. Now we need to save that information out to the disk drive. By saving it, that's going to allow Jaguar to load it automatically the next time we start up the software, and you'll see that in more detail in just a moment. So let's save these divisions, these settings if you will, out to the disk. When it pops up on screen, it's going to show you a race folder, and you've probably already set up a folder specifically for your race. In this example, we've got a folder set up on our hard drive called Races. Now what I'm going to do is simply type in a file name for these divisions. So I said earlier that our fake race is the St. Louis perhaps festival. Maybe it's an art show and they're doing a 5 and 10K in combination with it. Whatever the case is, we need to give it a name. So we'll just keep it simple for today, and we'll type in St. Louis Divisions, and that'll tell us that these are the division setup or the settings for this weekend's race. Okay, so we've saved that out and we're done. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to go and set up our age groups. Remember, we've collected all of this information from the race director, and we learned about that in a previous module. So let's go back up to Race Info and let's select the age group settings. When we do that, you'll see a screen just like this one here that allows us to type in the various descriptions and the age ranges. Again, this information was covered in a module specifically teaching on age groups. As you can see, I've already typed in some of my age ranges here, and in fact I've gone ahead and set up my male finishers, their ages. I've also set up my grandmasters and my senior masters. Once all of my age groups are defined, I simply save that by clicking on this green button to the disk. You'll see that there's our divisions. We'll click on that, and what we'll do is we'll just change that last word from divisions to 2 words, and we'll call it age groups. So as simple as that. We're just going to type St. Louis age groups. When we hit save, that has now been written out to the disk. So what have we done? Very quickly, as you can see, we've set up our divisions and we've set up our age groups. Now let's go back to the main screen and let's talk about what's next. We've got data that was sent to us by the race organizer. We want to take a look at that data and we want to prepare it to be loaded into the Jaguar system. Now as you can see on screen, I've loaded an Excel spreadsheet file. Where did that come from? Well, the race organizer promised to send me the final online registrations 48 hours before the event. And so they did. They emailed it to me as an attached file. I simply saved that file to my races folder, just like I saved my divisions or age groups a moment ago. I've then opened up that file in Excel, and you can see it on screen right now. Now one of the things we want to do when we get data from somebody is we want to take a look at just a couple of things very quickly. First of all, we want to make sure that they've provided us the divisions. Remember, this fake race this Saturday is a 5 and 10K. So it's crucial that we check to make sure that the race organizer has indicated who this person is and what race they're going to be participating in. As you can see when I scroll down, you'll see there's 5Ks, there's 10Ks, and they've done a good job of telling us which race this participant is in. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure there are no commas in this Excel spreadsheet. And the reason for that is that Jaguar actually saves all of its data in its database out to the disk using commas to separate the different columns of information. Well, when we need to read this Excel spreadsheet, this extra comma, for example, that you see right here, could cause us a problem because Jaguar is going to interpret that and say, you've got a comma, so the junior must be the next column over. And we don't want that. So simply put, just get rid of all of the commas in your spreadsheet. How do you do that? If you notice, I'm going to click up here on the upper left on this little icon, and when I do that, it's highlighted the entire spreadsheet for me. All I have to do is then select Find and Select. There's an option called Replace. I'll bring that up on screen, and I'll simply tell Excel I want you to look for any comma and just turn that into perhaps a space. When I click on Replace All, you'll notice that it has made 3 replacements, and in fact, if we look, we can see that we no longer have a comma in the name. So we've quickly gone through here, we've verified that we have some divisions, and we've verified that there are no commas. Now, what do we do if we don't get the race divisions? In this particular case, because it's a 5K and a 10K, we have no choice but to contact the race organizer or the race director and say, we can't load that data because we don't know who is in each race. If in fact it was just a 5K and that's all we were going to be timing, we could simply add a column or insert a column. We could put the header just like you see here where it says race. We could type in 5K if it was just a 5K event, copy that down to all of the cells here, and we could load that into Jaguar. There's a rule about Jaguar that's very important. No commas, and you have to make sure that we have a division. Even if it's just a 5K only race and you don't have it from the race organizer, you have to insert that column into the Excel spreadsheet and make sure it says 5K. Okay, now back to our fake race. We've got a 5K, 10K going on. We've gotten rid of the commas. Everything else looks reasonably good. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to save this information out of Excel. It's important to remember that Jaguar doesn't read a native Excel spreadsheet, meaning we're not going to read what's called a workbook in Excel. We're going to read what's called a CSV file. That stands for comma separated values. And Microsoft makes it very easy to save our spreadsheet in that format. We're just going to select Save As I've done here. And you'll notice it automatically defaulted for us to Excel Workbook. Well, we want to change that. So we're going to call this a CSV file. And if I scroll down, one of the options here is in fact CSV, comma delimited. You want to be careful because there's 2 other CSVs farther down which are older formats and we don't want to use those. We absolutely want to use the one that says CSV, comma delimited. And you'll notice, okay, it changed that for us as the Save As type. Now, we want to save this out to a slightly different name because it's no longer our online registrations, it's our online registrations, and we'll just type in something like cleaned up. We've cleaned up the online registrations, and we'll save that out as a CSV. When we go to save this, Excel's going to give us a warning. And the reason is it's saying if you save it this way, you can't have multiple sheets or style sheets or workbooks here. Well, we don't have multiples, we just have one. So you're always going to click yes. You're going to tell Microsoft, yes, it's okay to save this in this format. So I'm going to click yes. Now, the most important step here is we have to close out Excel. That's critical because Excel currently has our files locked. If we don't close Excel, we won't be able to pull this data into the Jaguar database. Okay, now what have we done? Well, we've cleaned up our registration file that was sent to us by the race organizer, and we need to get it into Jaguar now. And to do that, we've already closed out Excel. We've got our Jaguar software running. We're going to come over to the database option, and we're simply going to select the option that says Import Registration Data from CSV or Text File. When I click on that, you're going to see this window open up, and it's going to give us the ability now to select the file that we want to load and also define the particular locations of those fields that we have in the file. So I'm going to select the File to Import button. You'll notice it went to my races folder, and I can see right there's my online registrations cleaned up. Notice while I'm in here, by the way, there's my divisions that I saved a moment ago, and there's my age groups. So they're in the races folder as well. we're going to go ahead and say open up this particular file, and it's going to say can't open or read the file correctly. And the reason for that is I haven't closed the file yet. Remember, you have to do that. So you've just seen a perfect example of what happens if you haven't closed out your Excel file. It's going to give you a warning message. Let's try that again. I've just closed that file for good now, and let's see what happens when we click on it. There you go. It's automatically brought up that information for that file, and it's showing us up here the column information. It's telling us essentially where our columns are located in the file. I have the opportunity to type in some additional numbers so I can define my columns, I can define my fields, and again, there's a video on It's Social that talks about this in great detail. So if you want to learn more about this, there is a video specifically on how to import. In our case, we're just going to keep moving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that looks good. Go ahead and start the import process. It says, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Do we have headers on the first row? We do. We want to get rid of those. And it's given us a warning, so let's take a look at that. The gender field does not contain an M or F in it. So as it's loading the data, it's actually analyzing it, and it's pointed out that Kyle Henson has some information coming in, but it's also missing his gender. So we can deal with that later on. We'll see that 99 records were processed. We now have that information loaded into Jaguar, so we can quit the import. And now what we want to do is we want to begin to take a look at that data and see if there are any problems with it. How do we do that? Well, it's really simple. We just go up to our Reports menu, and you'll have an option called Database Analytics. And what Analytics will let you do is it will let you automatically analyze the file for any kinds of problems, common problems that can be corrected pre-race. Things like missing or invalid genders, missing ages, or perhaps a division that's not there, or it's the wrong division. It'll even take a look and see if the name fields are incorrect, meaning that maybe there's a name missing. Perhaps there's a first name but no last name. One of the other very powerful options is the invalid 5K, 10K. We can't do this option because what it would do is look for invalid times, and we haven't had our race yet. It's this Saturday. So that one wouldn't do us any good. To keep it simple, we're just going to select Analyze all of the above fields here, and when I do that, it's going to pop up a little box. I'm not going to print this to the printer. I don't really need it that way since this is a video demonstration. So I'm going to ask it to generate that report to the screen, and let me size that just a little bit so that you can see it a little easier. Okay, so what have we got on screen here? In our report window, it's telling us that it's analyzed our database and it has found some problems. First of all, it says Bib3, Annie Banks, who's age 26, is saying it's probably not a male. Annie looks like a female name, so that's probably right. Same thing with Mike Garner. You'll notice he's been flagged as incorrect because he's probably not a female. Here, this one's obvious. Bib 17, Stedman Anderson, doesn't have an age, and I doubt if Reed Gubson is 153 years old and running a 5K today. So we obviously have a problem there. And if we go a little further down, we see Peter Omeyer. Well, what's the problem there? Well, it's pretty obvious. We have a 5K and 10K going on Saturday, but we have 19K in the database. How could that happen? It's quite easy. If you notice on your keyboard, the 9 and 0 key are very close to each other. Somebody just simply made a typo. Finally, here's that Kyle Henson guy that we read about when we did the import. You remember it popped up that warning box to let us know he had some significant problems. And we can see, sure enough, we don't have a gender and we don't have a division. Now, one of the challenges here is we have no idea if Kyle's a male or female. I'm going to guess probably male, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is we don't have a division. The only way to find out what that division is we're going to contact the race director immediately, and we're going to say we don't know what race Kyle is in. That's going to be the race director's responsibility to get a hold of Kyle and find out what race they're participating in. All right, now we've done the analytics, so how would we correct those problems? Let's just fix a couple so you can get that idea here. We're going to go to Database. We're going to view the database in memory. I'm going to scroll that down into your view there. And again, remember, on Annie Banks, it flagged that and said there might be a problem. So we can go out here and we can look in the database and we can see, sure enough, Annie Banks is currently set to be a male. I can simply just type F for female and correct it. Let's pick another one. Let's go down to, say, Bib 17. So I'll type in 17 here, press the Enter key, and there's Stedman Anderson. Let's go out and take a look at Stedman Anderson, and let's see, well, Stedman's actually missing an age. Now, Maybe Stedman didn't want to give us his age and didn't want us to know. So in this case, we're going to type in 99. We're actually going to move Stedman to the age group 99. And if you remember, we had in our age group file 99, which was called basically people who don't want to give us their age. It means they won't win an award. And that's okay. They've chosen not to give us their age. All right, let's fix, say, one more. Let's fix that one where we had a 19K race and there was obviously a typo. If I type in bib number 37, and I go down, I notice there's Peter Omeyer, and if I scroll over, I can see there's 19K, and that's obviously wrong, and it's clear that it was probably meant to be 10K. So by using the analytics, we were able to find some problems, and we're able to go through the database, and we're able to correct those problems. Okay, so we've cleaned up our database and we don't have all those problems in it anymore. Well, at least we've cleaned up a few of them in this demonstration. You get the idea. We need to now save our database. Let's think about this for a moment. We imported the data. It's sitting in memory, but it hasn't been written to the disk drive. Very important you always remember, importing data simply takes something like an Excel spreadsheet or whatever the data was in, it brings it into memory, much like a spreadsheet would do, but we haven't written it to the disk yet. So we're going to do that now. Let's save our database, and again, it's going to pop up and show us our races folder. Remember, our original file was called St. Louis Online Registrations. That came from the race director. We took out the commas, did a little bit of editing on it, and said, well, let's save that as a cleaned up file, and that's what we did. Now we want to change this again, and this time we're ready for the race other than maybe Kyle. We've got to get that figured out with the race director, but we're darn close. So we're going to say this is going to be our St. Louis database. Or if we want to get real fancy, we could say something perhaps like St. Louis race database. Okay, you get to decide that, but we're essentially going to give it a name, and we're going to tell it to save that out. When we do, you'll notice it writes those records out to the disk, and it's done that for us. And now we're ready to use that database for our race this Saturday. Okay, so let's recap what we've done with this data that we received. Remember, the race organizer sent us the online registration file, which was an Excel workbook. We cleaned that up a little bit, took out the commas, and we saved that to a CSV format. That's critical because Jaguar can't read an Excel workbook. It reads CSV files. Once we had the data imported from that CSV file, then we went through with analytics and we found some of the common problems that are typical of a race database. We've gone into the database screen as you see here, and we've cleaned up some of those issues. All right, so let's close out the database screen and let's take a look at the last thing we want to set up before our race this weekend. We want to go up to Race Info and we want to select our filters. Remember, we have a 5K and a 10K going on this Saturday, and we don't want to read the chips on perhaps the 10K people who are standing around the start line while the 5K is getting ready to run. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into filters, and we're not going to go through great detail on this because there's an entire module just devoted to setting up filters. What I want to point out here is that we might go in, for example, and just say, all right, we're only going to accept chip reads on the 5K, something that simple. The point is you want to go in here, you want to set up your filters, make sure they're defined, and once you've done that, you can exit that screen. Okay. Finally, we have to go set up our defaults. I want you to take a look as we come into the Edit menu here and we come down and select Defaults. You're going to notice something quite interesting. Our age group is already sitting there. In other words, when we saved our age group file, we saved it as St. Louis age groups. And Jaguar assumes that that's what we're going to want to use the next time we power up the software. Notice here the divisions are already filled in for us as well. So it says St. Louis divisions, and there's our database that we just saved out. Okay? So what we have to do now is we have to save all of this to a file that we call a default file. What is a default file? It's nothing more than a collection of information and settings that Jaguar will use the next time it automatically starts. Think about it this way. You've got age groups, you've got divisions, you've got a database, you've got filters. When Saturday morning comes, we don't want to have to go manually load all of those individual files because that could take some time. So by collecting all that information into what we call a default file and saving it, Jaguar is going to automatically load those for us, saving us valuable time on race day. All right, so we've got our log file, which is where, again, we're just writing information about how the system's performing, and that was covered in an earlier module. There's our race age group file we want to use. There's our division file. There's our database. We have to have a chip output file. You've learned that in a previous module, but I'll just type in here perhaps races. Now, one of the things that we caution you about is if you're not an expert user, typing in like I'm doing can be really dangerous. And the reason is you might type in the wrong path. In other words, you may not point to the right folder. So rather than typing like I was doing, let's pretend you're not quite yet the expert, and you're going to click on the Browse button so that it's a lot safer. Notice it browsed to that folder, and now what I can do is I can say, I'm going to call this my chip output file, which is just our little backup file of all our chip reads. I'm going to click on Open, and it'll fill it in for us. See how easy that is? And so we're going to recommend that as a beginning user or even an intermediate user, always use the Browse button. Some of the advanced users can type it in directly. I'm one of the most advanced, and I almost always use the Browse button. All right, notice there's no backup race database. We need to make sure we've got one of those because we don't want to lose all this good information while the race is going on. There I go typing again, but again, I'm an expert. So I'm going to say races, and I'm going to say my backup is going to be called backup file, okay? And I might even put the word DB on the end of that just to designate that it's a database. All right, so I've set up some of my default files here. I'm going to go over to General. I'm going to take a look at those and say, yeah, that looks good. I think that's set up the way I want. I'm going to make sure my database columns that I want enabled are, in fact, checked. In this case, you can see I'm only using split 1, 2, 3. I'm going to verify that my reader settings are good. I might take a look at my network, and I noticed, yep, this Saturday I do need to send results over to the announcer and kiosk system. So I've got my send to remote enabled, and I'm kind of the guy who wants to always have redundancy. I never go to a race and not have redundancy. So what have I done? I'm going to be listening for messages coming from my backup system 30 to 40 feet behind my finish line. I'm psycho about redundancy, and so I'm always using my second Jaguar system for that purpose, and I've got my listen for messages checked. Let's go over to print setup. I think I've got all that set up right. I'm going to go ahead and report the results in hundredths of a second, and that's what I've got checked there. And finally, I go over and I say I want to refresh my kiosk perhaps every 5 minutes. So all of my settings are the way I want them to be on Saturday morning when I power up the system. I've got my filters set to make sure they're properly set up. The last thing I have to do is simply save my defaults. So let's do that. I'm going to select Save. It's going to pop open that window you've seen so many times now. And this time I'm going to call this something that's unique to the race, like St. Louis default settings. Okay? So when I type that in, what's going to happen is it's going to save all those settings to the disk. Now remember, I said a moment ago that I want Jaguar to automatically load those on Saturday morning. Perhaps I can't be at the race and I'm sending one of my engineers or maybe one of my staff members. You'll notice right here it says Startup Default File. If you want your defaults to load when Jaguar starts up, you have to then tell us which default file you want to use. And this brings up a really interesting point. If you think about it, I could have a default file for Saturday morning's race, and I could have a different default file for Sunday morning's race. And in fact, in Jaguar, I could have multiple default files which essentially have different settings for a particular race. In this particular case, we're just doing our fake race on Saturday morning. So I'm going to browse. I'm going to go to that particular folder that I've been using over and over again. There's my default settings, so I'm going to grab that. I'm going to put that into this prompt right here. Now, I'm going to save that out again because what I've done is I've essentially said that's what I want you to load automatically. So I'm going to save that back out again because I added that field to my defaults. It said you've already got one. I've overridden it and said that's fine. Guess what happens? Now my defaults are set up, and on Saturday morning when I start up my laptop, Jaguar is going to know to go out and load all of those default settings, meaning my age groups, my divisions, my race database, and it's going to know where it's going to write my chip output and backup files. Now at this point, we've set up some of the basic defaults that we're going to need for Saturday, but let's dive a little bit deeper into just a few areas that we have not yet touched on. Now I'm going to go ahead and save, or I should say set, some of those settings that we're going to need for Saturday morning. So let's do that, and you can follow along and watch how I would set up the system, specifically some of the advanced settings for this race. I'm going to turn on my autosave because I want to make sure my backups are being made automatically for me of that database during the race. I like my autosaves to happen a little more often, so I'm going to set it to every 60 seconds. By typing 60, clicking that box, and also checking that box, basically what's going to happen is Jaguar is going to automatically back up my data for me every 60 seconds throughout the entire event, which is great. If something would go wrong with a laptop, I could just go back and pull up those files. All right, let's go to General Settings. What do I need to change there? Well, I'm going to go ahead and check this box right here that says don't show the chip in the bib history if the participant has a finish time. Somebody comes across a finish line, they're hanging out maybe in front of the finish line, and I'm reading their chip over and over. I have no reason to keep showing that, so I'm going to check that box. I want to go ahead and enable sound. Turns out on the race this Saturday, I'm going to hook up the laptop to the PA system, and every time somebody comes across, it's going to make a nice little noise. I don't care about looking at unknown or foreign chips. So if somebody wears a chip that's not a Jaguar chip, perhaps last weekend they were at a race, they had a chip on their shoe, and they left it on there. I'm just going to tell it I don't care about that. I'm only focused on Jaguar chips, so I'm going to check that box. My first chip number is, in fact, 1, but my last chip number or bib number is 100, so I'll set that. My scan rate is going to be 1, which means every 1 second we'll go out and pull the finish times in. If I'm at the finish line, I won't have an offset, but if I'm setting the defaults for the backup finish line, I'm going to want to subtract perhaps 2 or 3 seconds to not penalize the runner if I have to use the read from the backup. My minimum split time, I'm going to change that because, again, it's a 5K race, and I don't think anybody should be able to finish in under 14 minutes. So I'll set my minimum split to 14, which makes sure somebody can't sort of come back early and we record a time for them. I am at the finish line, so my database mode is set correctly, and that's good. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say, you know what, all of these little icons that are on screen, I'll leave them on there. I could change those, but for the race on Saturday, that's fine. I can leave them on there. I'm going to go over to my database tab, and I'm going to see, you know, I don't have any splits for this particular race, so I'll uncheck those columns. I'm not going to see those on screen. And in fact, in this particular case, it's a gun start. There is not going to be a chip time, so I could get rid of, if I wanted to, the chip time columns because it's going to be a gun start. I have a single system at the finish line, and I'm just going to show my elapsed gun times. I've got some other columns over here. I could turn those off, but that's okay. I don't care if they're on screen or not. I've checked my reader settings. That looks good. Everything is set up for the race. I'm using a bronze system. It has a single reader in it. I'm going to be using my IP address here, my Ethernet network. That looks fine. I come over to my network settings. I want to verify again. Yep, I've got everything set correctly here. I'm sending and listening. I'm sending out announcer information. That's good. Oh, that's right. I've got a backup system 40 feet behind the finish line. So if I was changing the defaults there, I'd want to send the reads over, not the announcer information. It's important you check that box if you're sending reads from one system to another. I'm at the finish line, so I'll check the announcer and leave reads unchecked. Finally, going to come over to my print setup, make sure everything looks good there. I am going to be printing reports to the printer for the race director, so I'll go ahead and tell Jaguar to automatically print reports to the printer, so I've got that set. And if I wanted to, I might say, well, I'm going to automatically generate an HTML file, and I could do that as well. In this case, I don't need to do that. This is a pretty simple race on this 5K. It's just a gun start. They're going to go out and come back to a finish line somewhere, and I'm going to basically just print some reports and generate it to 100th of a second. All right, so what I've done quickly here is I've just gone through each of my tabs, which is something you're going to want to do. You just want to verify that some of these advanced settings are set the way you want them, and once you're done with that, you're simply going to save your defaults again out to the disk. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. You'll see I've already got one out there. That's the one I saved a few minutes ago. Let's save over the top of that now, so we'll do that, and I'll say save. It'll warn me and say, are you sure you want to write over the top of that? Yes, I want to replace it. Therefore, I have saved it. So simple as that. I've basically gone through, I've set up all my defaults, I've done all those advanced sort of settings, I've saved it out to that races folder, and the next time Jaguar starts, it will load all of those settings, including my filters for me, automatically. So, now you know how to set up your system, you know how to put in all those defaults, save those defaults. Looks like we're ready for the big race this Saturday. Thanks for attending. We'll see you in the next module.